So Formula One ain't cheap. Mercedes spent $460 million to win the Constructors' Championship in 2020, and Red Bull weren't far behind that number. Then in 2021, even with the cost cap regulations, the numbers were still astronomical. So how on earth did the majority of teams manage to turn a profit? How do you spend that much money designing, making, and then racing the most advanced cars on the planet and still make some significant dough? Well, let me take you through where all that money comes from, and no, it's not all from Daddy Stroll. So Zak Brown said recently that the era of F1 teams being worth billions is fast approaching, but on the face of it, that's hard to understand. With the engines alone costing more than $25 million a year and the drivers taking salaries that rival even the biggest sports people in the world, it gets even harder to understand. Especially as you bear in mind that Mercedes made a loss in 2017 and 2018 and 2019, even after winning the Constructors and the Drivers' Championship by miles. And that has been standard practice for years. F1 was never intended to be a money-making exercise in itself. It was meant to be a marketing exercise for the sponsors and the teams who would then make money off the back of it. This then means they can spend more money sponsoring teams and the cycle continues. But this has changed in recent years. The teams are actually starting to make some serious dollar. But first though, where does all this money go? How can the bill be that massive? Well, the first thing is R&D, because without a good car, you're nowhere. So teams like Mercedes have upwards of 800 employees, and with the majority being some of the most talented and hence well-paid engineers on the planet, the bill is massive. So that bit's obvious, but then there's all the facilities, machinery, materials, and you can see how the zeros just keep coming. Engines next, and this is a bit bizarre. So if you're Williams buying engines from Mercedes or Haas buying them from Ferrari, the $25 million a year makes sense. You supply us with engines for the year and we pay you money in return. And really that cost is a pretty good deal. Haas don't need to spend any money developing the engines and Ferrari do it for them. Interestingly, one of the weirdest things is that it's kind of like an all-you-can-eat deal. So if Haas stick the car in the wall, Ferrari still send them a new engine. It's just like a fixed year price. Imagine if Mazepin had to pay for everyone he wrecked. People like Mercedes or Ferrari or Alpine, they still pay that flat rate, despite the engines costing hundreds of millions to develop, and it's the same teams doing that job. Well, they do this by actually separating the companies. You know how Mercedes have like HPP, it's a separate company? Well, this enables them to keep the books separate and then the costs separate. It's pretty genius if you ask me. The other teams do this too. Then there are the salaries, and whilst the engineers and people needed to run the team are pricey, they are a drop in the bucket compared to some of the big salaries they've got to pay. First are the drivers. I mean, Lewis Hamilton is thought to earn $40 million a year on his own. But then there's like team principals and CEOs. So if you take Christian Horner as an example, he's on $10 million a year. Toto is kind of an edge case in this scenario because he owns a third of the Mercedes F1 team. You know, Daimler own a third, Ineos owns a third, he owns a third. But he's still on $7 million a year of salary, so and probably way more if you take the dividends into account and all that stuff. Anyway, then there are the operational costs, and imagine the funds needed to ship an entire team and all their stuff and the cars from one race to another, especially if you're traveling most of the globe in one go, you know, between races. So the costs for this are absolutely ridiculous. But where this all comes together is that fortunately for the teams, whilst the cost numbers are high, the revenue numbers are actually getting even higher. For the past few seasons, the top teams like Merck, Red Bull and Ferrari have been spending around $400 million a season and bringing home way more than that. So with that money they bring home, first of that is Formula One themselves pay the teams. Firstly, a $36 million to all of the teams spread evenly, and then prize money on top of that depending on where they place. So Formula One managed to generate a tad over $1 billion last year, and that's from TV stuff, sponsorships, all the rest. And they pay around 47-ish% of the profits to the teams, with Mercedes getting the most because they won the championship and Haas the least. And then there are loads of other silly payments on top of this that make little to no sense. So Ferrari gets some for being Ferrari, and then other teams like Williams and McLaren get some, and $35 million to Red Bull for signing the Concord agreement first, and so on. Anyway, a lot of those are going away for the next few seasons. The top teams get around $150 million in total from Formula One management, and the small teams bring home nearest $60 million. So the difference is pretty crucial. But surprisingly, this isn't even a majority of the funding for a lot of the teams. The next big chunk is sponsors. So all of the brands on the side of the car pay a premium to the teams to be there, as well as some other teams paying even more to be a title partner, like Petronas with Mercedes and recently announced Oracle at Red Bull. And this is where the real money is made. For example, Petronas paid $450 million over a number of years to Mercedes to be the title partner. And Oracle with Red Bull is a similar deal, $100 million a year for 5 years. But further down the grid, the prices are a little lower. lower, Cognizant paid Aston Martin $30 million a year, and similar between Safina Foods and Williams. And then there are brands like Bose, Tommy Hilfiger, etc. on the Merc, and then loads of others on all the other cars, you know, the small ones that are dotted around all over the place. But the teams actually have between 15 and 25 sponsors depending on the team, and they all pay varying amounts depending on how much they're featured, you know, whether it's on the team kit, on the car, on the helmets, etc. When you have that many, the numbers really do stack up. Apart from Bose seem to have disappeared this year. Maybe Toto smashing the Bose headphones wasn't a great move in the end. But these prices are far, far higher than, for example, Uralkali on the Haas, and that makes sense because in 2020, the Mercedes car received 19% of the total TV coverage over the whole season. So a fifth of all of the frames that were showed on TV of the races contain the Mercedes. And then with that, all of Mercedes sponsors, where the majority of the time the Uralkali logo is shown, it's because the Haas is in the barrier. Sorry, not sorry. Then one of the most interesting payments going into the team's bank account are the pay drivers. You can point your finger as much as you like at various different drivers for doing this, but they can really support a team and keep them racing. For example, Lance Stroll, who are we kidding? Lawrence Stroll paid Williams $40 million to race in 2017. And it was the same with Latifi. You know, Safina Foods, we mentioned earlier, they're the title sponsor for Williams. That's owned by Michael Latifi, so that says it all. And you can't blame them for taking it, especially with Latifi, who's probably faster than anyone else they'd put in that seat anyway. So that's all the money coming in. So what are the profits after it all? Well, it's hard to tell. Essentially, it's generally understood that pretty much all of the teams broke even last year, with Red Bull and Merc bringing down some decent profits. I mean, we don't know for sure, but these are estimated to be between $10 and $20 million. And that may seem low considering the total costs. Well, think about when the $140 million cost cap comes in next year. These profits are expected to shoot up even for the smaller teams, which isn't just a good thing for the rich owners, but it is also for us. Williams will now be spending the same amount as Mercedes, and that is a great proposition. It also brings in more sponsors, teams, and investors, as owning an F1 team could be a real profit-generating enterprise. And we as F1 fans get to enjoy that in the form of closer racing, so I'm on board. Anyway, who do you think will win, George or Lewis this year? We made a whole video about it you should check out here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.